Well, good evening, everyone. It's very nice to see a packed house for what I hope will be a lively and informative discussion. We're joined tonight by, we'll start on my left, David Mcdowell. David Mcdowell is the author of A Modern History of the Kurds, one of the few standard works of history relating to the travails of Kurds from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and the former Soviet Union. On my left here is Bayan Sami Abdurrahman. Bayan is the High Representative of the Kurdistan Regional Government in London. Bayan was a journalist for 17 years, many of those with the Financial Times. And following the tragic death of her father and brother in a terrorist attack in February the 1st, 2004, Bayan decided to enter politics representing the Kurdistan region. We're also joined by Adel Darwish, veteran of Middle East and African journalism, who is the current editor of the Middle East magazine.
Political editor. The editor is sitting there. She probably would knife me if I said that.
And to my immediate right, we have Kamran Karadahi, who is the another journalist, former journalist. I think you've entered journalism again since your retirement, but for the last few years, Kamran has been the chief of staff to Iraq's President Jalal Talabani in Baghdad. So we hope that he has many interesting stories to tell.
He will knife me.
We're also joined via a phone link by Peter Galbraith, the former US ambassador to Croatia, who has had a long interest in the Kurds. He was one of the first American diplomats to take a real interest in the Kurds and highlighted the tragedies of Halabja and the Anfal. And he's currently in Zambia. I don't know what that quite means for the future of the Kurds, but we hope he will be joining us in a few minutes. He's also the author, I should mention this because he'll shoot me, or stab me, whatever, of The End of Iraq, which, how American incompetence, what is it? How American Incompetence Created a War Without End, suitably provocative title. He's being, basically my name's Michael Howard. I've reported for The Guardian from Iraq since 2002, both in Baghdad and in Kurdistan. I also am a regular contributor to The Economist.
Hello?
Peter, hi, it's Michael. Peter, can you hear me in Zambia?
Hello?
No. Peter, can you hear me? Peter Galbraith.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, it's Michael. We're here at the Frontline Club.
Good.
Waiting for your words of wisdom on the future of the Kurds. So I take by that silence, you think the future is not
very bright.
It's not very bright. Can you hear me, Peter? He can't.
Let's try again.
Okay. Well, let's just fill in some time until we can get Peter back. I mean, nobody really knows how many Kurds there are. Some estimates vary between 20, 25, 35, 40 million. Of course, the countries in which they now live, have consistently underestimated the number of Kurds living for obvious reasons. But they're often described as the world's largest nation without a state. They're the orphans of geography and history.
Hello?
Peter. Hi, it's
Michael.
Michael. Hi, Peter. We're just.
Yes, I can.
You can hear me now.
I can. I couldn't hear you before.
Good, good. So what's the weather like in Zambia? No. We're just, we'd like to, the topic of tonight's discussion is it time for an independent Kurdistan? Now, we know you've been following the Kurdish issue for many years, and we also know that you're probably one of the people who would say, yes, it is time for an independent Kurdistan. Would you agree with my assertion?
Yes, you accurately described my view. An independent Kurdistan in the territory of the former Iraq.
Your book, The End of Iraq, is basically arguing that Iraq has broken up, and therefore any future political settlement should be a recognition of the facts on the ground. And yet, the Iraqi Kurdish leadership have decided to stay with Iraq. Would you, because of the vicissitudes of geography and history, would you doubt their wisdom in their chosen course?
No, not at all. And these are not inconsistent positions. The Iraqi Kurdish leadership recognized, as indeed do I, that in 2007 is not an opportune time for Kurdistan to declare its independence, principally because it would be landlocked and face a hostile Turkey, Iran, and possibly a hostile rump Iraq. But the fact is that the Kurdish leadership does not believe in Iraq. If they were given a choice, every single one of them would like to see an independent Kurdistan. They all believe that it will happen. Masoud Barzani says he expects it to happen in his lifetime. And that reflects the unanimous sentiments of the Kurdish people who voted, as you know, in 98% in a referendum in January 2005 for independence. And so my belief is that inevitably, sooner or later, the opportunity will present itself for Kurdistan to become independent, as it did for Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Slovakia, and that they will walk through that door because they actually don't believe in Iraq. In fact, they don't like Iraq, and they don't want to be part of it. At some point, sooner or later, the opportunity for independence will exist.
Okay, let me bring in Bayan Rahman now, representative of the Kurdistan regional government. Peter says that the Kurdish leadership in Iraq does not believe in Iraq. Would you agree?
I'm afraid I hate to disagree with Peter because we're good friends, but I do disagree with him. I think if you look at the situation in Iraq, you will see, and I'm sure Kamiran will back this up because he's been in Baghdad, but if you look at the situation in Iraq today, the president of Iraq is Kurdish, the foreign minister of Iraq is Kurdish, the deputy prime minister, the water minister, the minister for industry, the Peshmerga are part of the Iraqi security forces. So we in Kurdistan have invested a great deal in making Iraq work. So I would disagree that we don't believe in Iraq. We do believe in Iraq, but at the same time, of course, we also believe in the rights of the people of Kurdistan.
Peter, the post-World War I
settlement... Michael, let me just pose the question to Bayan as to whether she, as a good Iraqi, would rather have an independent Kurdistan or that Kurdistan should be part of Iraq if she could choose.
The question is whether it should be an independent Kurdistan or part of Iraq. Well,
if it was up to you, what would you prefer in your heart? What would you like to see?
Well, in my heart, like every Kurd, and as President Barzani, president of the Kurdistan region, has said, it's inevitable that there will be an independent Kurdistan one day. And we are not ashamed to say we are Kurds, nor are we ashamed to say that, like other nations, we have a right to self-determination. The question is when and how. Today, declaring independence, I think, would lead to a slaughter. What we want today is to be part of a federal and democratic Iraq, an Iraq that actually we think we will get there, but it's, as we all know, is very difficult and painful.
Peter, can I ask you,
Michael? Sure.
This week the Kurdish regional government has signed 5 oil deals with various private companies. This has been viewed as a move towards independence by the Kurds' enemies and their rivals in the region. I know that at some point you had you gave some assistance to the Kurds in drawing up the constitution of Iraq, which actually provides for regional control of oil. Do you believe that the intention was to create an economic platform for the Kurds from which they could launch independence?
Well, the Constitution of Iraq creates a virtually powerless central government and an extremely powerful regions. The central government, anybody who wants to understand the Constitution of Iraq needs to read two articles, Article 110 and Article 115. Article 110 says the following are the exclusive powers of the central government, and it's almost nothing. Article 115 says if it's not listed in Article 110, then regional law is superior. And Article 121 goes on to say that regions are entitled to have their own armies. So oil is not something that is in Article 110. Therefore, ipso facto, it is subject to regional law superior to federal law. In addition, there's a clause on oil that says that clearly gives regions control over a new oil field. So I think the Kurds have simply acted consistent with the Constitution. But Kurdistan is, in every regard, a de facto independent state today. The Peshmerga are nominally perhaps linked to the Iraqi security forces, but they're not under the command of the authorities in Baghdad. They're under the command of the Kurdistan regional government. And everybody knows that that's where their loyalty lies. They wouldn't go. They couldn't be ordered any place unless the Kurdistan government agreed, and that, in fact, is true for the Kurdish battalions in the Iraqi army itself. The federal government has no tax power, and in Kurdistan, it's even illegal to fly the Iraqi flag. So, in what sense is Kurdistan part of Iraq? It's only if you look at a map and if you notice that they don't have a flag on First Avenue in New York at the United Nations.
Put the case even more strongly against declaring independence. If we have effective control over our region, we have control over our security, which is why our area is more secure and stable than other parts of Iraq. If we have all of that, then why declare independence? We are part of Iraq, but at the same time we're able to be autonomous.
If I could turn now to Cameron. President Talabani, Iraq's first Kurdish president, has perhaps the very difficult position of being a Kurd in a majority Arab country. He is a long-time leader of the Kurdish liberation movement, and yet he finds himself this sort of a rather ironic position of actually holding the country together. How has he been able to do that, and is his commitment to Iraq genuine?
Well, you say he's in a difficult position, but in fact, I think he's enjoying this position. He is a leader who really have the ability to talk to everyone, and all problems in Iraq, whether it is with the Americans, whether it is with the UN, with the Arab countries, with the Arab League, and or with the other different Iraqi political groups, whenever there is a problem, they all come to the president, to Talabani, and the process of solution starts with him. And yes, it is an irony that a Kurdish president is really keeping the political groups of Iraq together, and I think he is sincere in what he's doing, and this is why he can influence others. He can influence other political Arab political leaders in Iraq, and they listen to him. So it is, and I think he managed to transfer himself from a Kurdish leader into an Iraqi leader, and probably, of course, I don't know how, what is exactly in his mind and in his heart, but he committed himself to Iraq when he accepted this position, when he accepted to be a leader of Iraq, and he always says this: since I am the leader of Iraq, then I will act as a 100% Iraqi.
Okay. Adil Darwish, you've been following the Middle Eastern press for quite a while now. How does the rest of the Arab world view an Iraq with a Kurd as president, with a Kurd as foreign minister?
I think it presents them with a dilemma. There is actually what's so interesting what Bayan was saying, and basically it is actually the real politic of playing there and trying to get what is available and what's achievable. If you look at the breakup of Yugoslavia, for example, where you have almost all of them, Croatia, Bosnia, we saw a lot of bloodshed and so on. The one country, which is Montenegro, twice the size of Kurdistan, but population only 650,000. They actually waited with everyone was taking refuge there, and they more or less got their independence without bloodshed, although they still very much demographically and very much in transport and economically linked to Serbia. But that's actually one example in history. And when you look at one nation, as you said in the introduction, who actually were made that Wilsonian promise back after World War I, yet that's never been fulfilled. I mean, I remember in 1975 when Henry Kissinger was in Paris negotiating over how to distract America from Vietnam. We're actually a group of hacks, and we doorstepped him. And the Shah just had signed the Shatl Arab agreement in Algeria with Saddam Hussein, who was deputy president of Iraq. And we did ask him, how come actually the commitment for democracy and self-determination to the Kurds? And he said, my friend, don't actually confuse charitable work with realpolitik. And I think actually the Kurds learned the lesson. I mean, it's almost mind-boggling what the Turks now are bombarding and air raids inside Iraq. Why wouldn't the Americans tell them, well, if you actually fire aircraft and bombard Iraq, we'll take this aircraft out? But not, because the real politics, the dynamics of politics is not allowing it. And I think it's quite right for the Kurds to wait. Which brings us to the actual question of the opinion makers in the Middle East and how it's seen. And it's actually, sadly, with very few exceptions, mainly actually in Egypt and perhaps ethnic minorities press scattered all over the place, the all Arab nationalist and Islamist media actually see the Kurds struggle not as people actually they should take inspiration from, but as part of what they call Zionist Western crusade against the Muslims and against the Arabs. And the reason for that is, the most Arab dictatorships have actually manipulated the media and always to focus on the Palestinian issue. And on one hand, political correctness for them is self-determination for the Palestinian people. But when it comes to the Kurds or the Amazigh or the Copts or the Nubians or the Shia and the Gulf and so on, that doesn't actually stop. That become a conspiracy against the Arabs. And article, I think it's Article 2 or Article 6 of the Iraqi constitution says Iraq is actually part of an Arab nation. So here we are. There's no legal entity in international law called the Arab nation. Well, there's a legal entity called Iraq, and yet they actually managed somehow to put this contradictory clause, and it's actually about 6 or 7 different Arab nations. You have this clause in their constitution, and then they have non-Arab minorities. So the question here is they will always present it this way. Secondly, you have the what stands as opposition now, mainly other Arab nationalist or Islamist press, and again, it's not their interest to promote the Kurds' interests. So they have the politics and the political culture in the Middle East actually again conspiring once more against the Kurds.
So, Peter,
one thing, I think the constitution says that Iraq is a different word. The constitution says it's a different wording, that Iraq is part of both Arab and Islamic worlds. There's something like that, not Arab nation.
Right. Sorry, it's translation then.
So Peter Galbraith, we've heard from Ad. Oh, he's gone.
Right.
Okay, that's a shame. Well, we thank Peter anyway. You might hear this on the podcast later. So perhaps we're going to turn to David Mcdowell now. David, we've just heard from Adil how isolated the Kurds are in the region. They're sort of the Middle East equivalent of Millwall Football Club. You know, nobody likes us. We
I'm not
don't
a footy
care.
player. I wouldn't know.
And certainly they live in a neighbourhood from hell. I mean, they're surrounded by enemies, all of whom are mistrustful. If this were a housing estate, there'd be ASBOs flying around like crazy. But why is it that in your recording of the Kurds' history, why is it that they've become so unpopular with all the regional neighbours? What is the threat that they pose?
The threat that they pose tends to be slightly different in the states within which they find themselves. But very, very broadly speaking, here we have a part of the world where the state system was, in a sense, installed at the end of the Great War in 1918. And new identities were imposed upon the people who lived in Mesopotamia, the people who lived in the mountains, in the border areas, people that we know as Kurds today, and even Turkey. The identity was changed almost overnight. From being an Ottoman to being a Turk within very limited borders compared with the Ottoman Empire. Each of these new states, including Iran after the overthrow, and indeed even before with the Qajars, has a major problem of ensuring cohesion and control and discipline. And this has been true for Ankara, it's been true for Tehran, it's true for Damascus, that's got myriad minorities, it's true for Baghdad. And given the way that the 20th century has unrolled, and particularly with the creation of Israel, and the way that both the West and the Israelis have done quite a lot to foster separatism amongst groups that don't feel comfortable with the new identity, for example, being Iraqi rather than being Shi'i or Sunni or being Kurdish, whatever identity you wish to take on. This has made governments extraordinarily nervous. And in 1937, the three major contenders that we're interested in, Turkey, Iraq and Iran, signed the Treaty of Sa'dabad, which basically agreed we will keep these Kurds under very tight control and we're not going to let them have their head. So, and they were all nervous, and particularly because the Kurds straddle the border areas. And it's not as if during the Ottoman period the Kurds have been totally quiescent. There was always a sense of tension between the lands the central government controlled and the more mountainous areas in the border areas where the control started to diminish, and it then became tribal control. And these tribes, which operated under tribal identity in the 20th century, began to think of themselves effectively as Kurds. In other words, the whole concept of Kurdishness changed from being a linguistic identity and a cultural identity to being a political identity. And I think one of the questions that I would ask as a historian is, how long is this political or ethnic identity going to last? Now, it's certainly going to last our lifetimes, but bear in mind that if you look at the history of the Middle East, the identity of being Muslim or Christian or Jewish or some other identity is much, much longer standing than the ethnic identities which have taken root from about 100 years ago. And we cannot be absolutely sure, and Osama bin Laden and the Islamic revivalism are reminders that there are other identities which remain extremely powerful. Now, governments really don't, governments of the states which have been constituted in the 20th century are really very, very unhappy to allow these other identities their head. And in my view, that is the fundamental tension between people who want space to express identities that they feel very, very strongly about, and governments which are very anxious to ensure that their states don't disintegrate.
Thank you. Shall we wait for the... well, let's ask Bayan now. I mean, about identity. Or let's wait for Peter.
quick exchange.
Zambia no point, I think it's. Okay, Bayan, you've lived much of your life outside of Kurdistan or Iraq. You're helping to build, in one way or another, a new Iraq. Do you see the conflicts of identity that David was talking about as the Kurdish national identity as being transient?
I think, well, you're asking me, and I'm Kurdish, so of course I feel that the Kurdish identity or sense of identity is very strong. We have certainly endured a 20th century, a whole century of attack on our culture, on our identity.
Hello.
Oh, hello, Peter.
Hi, Marina.
That was Bayan, Peter. We just interrupting Bayan's talking about conflicts of Kurdish identity, whether ethnic identity or an Islamic identity will prevail in the future.
Yes, so I think as Kurds, we have been under attack for at least throughout the 20th century. Our language, our heritage, our history has been written by others other than ourselves. And in fact, what we're seeing now in Kurdistan region in Iraq, because of the stability, the beginnings of democracy, the institutions that we're beginning to build, the fact that we can have TV stations, radio stations, films in Kurdish and so on, we're really seeing a kind of a blossoming or a flourishing of Kurdish culture and identity. And I would say something that my husband often says, he's a Kurdish artist himself. Kurdish song actually has been one of the, if you like, the flags of Kurdish identity. When it was difficult for anybody to print anything in Kurdish, to broadcast anything in Kurdish, it was Kurdish music that became the symbol and the focal point for Kurdish culture and identity. So I can see what David is saying about, you know, of course, Islam and Christianity and other religions are very, very powerful and lasting forces. But I would argue that Kurdish identity is very, very strong as well. And, you know, I don't see it being transient, at least in the even medium term.
I just also, Peter, are you still with us?
I am.
Yeah. Peter, just before we let you go, I wanted to turn the attention to American policy towards the Kurds. It seems to me, especially given the current crisis on the Turkish border with the PKK, that they have been caught half asleep, that they actually lack a policy. They have traditionally viewed the Kurdish issue through either humanitarian prism or one of security, whereas in fact now Iraq's Kurds have reached a point where they are a politically serious entity which cannot be ignored. Why do you think America has not really, in my opinion, woken up to that fact?
Well, I think this latest crisis has, in fact, woken policy makers up to that fact. And in recent months, the Bush administration's interaction with Kurdistan has been much more respectful and accepting of its of the fact that it really is a separate entity from the rest of Iraq. Part of the reason that the administration has been asleep, as you put it, on the Kurdish question is that it's so preoccupied with everything else that's going wrong in Iraq. But it is a striking statement of the decline of the U.S. position in the Middle East that Turkey, which is, after Germany, the most populous American NATO ally, might be contemplating a military action into Iraqi Kurdistan that could destabilize the one stable part of Iraq. Not only is this the signature project of the Bush administration, remaking Iraq, but there are also 150,000 American troops there who have their arms full with hands full with everything that's going on already, and the last thing they need is for an ally to cause them trouble in the one stable part of the country.
And do you think that an attack by Turkish troops is now more likely or less likely?
Well, I think the immediate crisis is passing. And I never thought a full-scale invasion was very likely because the cost to Turkey was going to be so high. I mean, this would be going into a territory where there were 100,000 Peshmerga. Compare that to the PKK having at most 5,000 fighters, and that, of course, on Turkish soil. But beyond that, it would have caused a huge rupture in the relations with the United States. It would have killed Turkey's chances of joining the European Union. So I didn't think that that was a likely course of action. I don't exclude bombings across the border, perhaps raids by special forces, but that, of course, won't solve the problem.
Many commentators who've argued against a Turkish incursion have said that it would be counterproductive. The PKK issue has been around for years, and the likelihood that a military operation would finish it, where it has failed to finish it for the last 25 years, is very remote, which leaves then a political solution. Do you think the Bush administration, which recently called the PKK our common enemy, is likely to be able to, it does have the diplomatic energy to help facilitate a political solution to the problem of the PKK and the Kurds in Turkey?
No. I mean, the Bush administration has said, as did I think the Clinton administration, that the PKK is a terrorist group, and indeed it has engaged in acts that can only be described as terrorism. And its position is that it's not going to, it certainly wouldn't negotiate directly with them. I think that the real hope is that Turkey can be persuaded to grant an amnesty and to bring back the remaining fighters who are up in Kandil Mountain on the Iraq-Iran border and some in the mountains in Turkey. The sad thing from a Turkish perspective is that they crushed the PKK in 1999, captured its leader. It became a very minimalist irritant, declared a ceasefire, and then nothing happened. So they just remained up in those mountains. Nobody paid any attention to them. And now, of course, they've discovered by their military actions that they can make themselves page one news throughout the world.
Kamran, President Talabani has been very active behind the scenes to try and alleviate the current crisis. Do you think that the Kurdish leadership and the Iraqi leadership could have done more to help Turkey?
Well, yes, I think yes. One of the problems is that the Kurdish leadership has really no plans for events like this current crisis with Turkey. I think the Kurdish leadership could have done more in terms of making it very clear. No, it's not good enough for us just to say, well, this is a problem between PKK and Turkey. We have nothing to do with them. They are not in our territory. There are a lot of things which can be done, and we know recently that the Kurdish leadership finally decided that yes, there is more that they can do. They banned a pro-PKK party. They decided to install more checkpoints on the mountains. They decided to take more strict measures to cut finances for the PKK and so on. So I think we are not talking about whether Turkey is right or wrong, but we are talking about the Kurdish leadership. I mean, we are, as Kurds, we have a very, so to say, a special status within Iraq. The Kurds are now a very active part of the Iraqi state and the Iraqi government. In Kurdistan, we have a Kurdish administration. We are treated by Europe, by the United States, as an entity and as a responsible part of the Iraqi government. So I think we should have acted in a more responsible way. We cannot have it both ways, become a part of a state, part of a government, running Iraq, and at the same time ignore our obligations toward toward Iraq's regions. I mean, we can have our sympathies and so on with our Kurdish brothers in other parts of Kurdistan, but we have to be responsible and act as a responsible government.
Adil Darwish.
Yeah, I think you just want to further to what Kamran said, and perhaps I will ask Peter as well. And that it would be very, very wise at this stage, even if the Kurdish leadership would, in fact, to use a limited arms response and round up the PKK and lock them up, because that would send a very important signal to Iran, to Turkey, to the whole world, that once they have full autonomy on the road to independence, they can actually live up to responsibility as part of the club of the nations of the civilized world, that they not allow acts of terrorism, and they're not going to let their future independent Kurdistan be used as a base to launch attacks by other rebellious Kurds in and other parts neighboring. That is actually on the Kurdish leadership responsibility now. On the America, it's almost actually amazing that the Americans did not have contingency plans for such eventuality. It was almost inevitable that a clash, that the PKK would exploit the situation and regroup again. And I just found it mind-boggling that the superpower, the only de facto empire in the world now, did not have a contingency plan for what's happening now. Now, it's very interesting what Peter said, but has actually the Americans told the Turks that, look, we do not want the situation to get out of hand, we don't want you to go and destabilize Kurdistan, we do not want you to have raids, and here is the carrots if you actually find a diplomatic solution, and we will help you. But if you actually do not go for this one, here is the stick. I just find it amazing that the Americans sitting on their hands and not actually engaging in this kind of politics.
Mm-hmm. Bayan, will the Iraqi Kurds pick up arms and try to oust the PKK troops from the mountains of northern Iraq?
I don't think the Kurdish leadership or the Kurdish population in Iraq would accept that. In the 1990s, the PKK did fight against the Kurds in Iraq, and there was a great deal of bloodshed and lives lost, and very little was achieved. So we have learned the lesson that military action between us and the PKK will fail. I would have thought that Turkey would have learned its lesson after 24 incursions into Kurdistan and Iraq, supposedly to chase out the PKK. They have failed. So surely they would have realized by now that military action will also fail. Just on the point of the point that has been made that the Kurdish leadership could do more, I'm sure we could do more. Everybody can always try harder. But I would argue that the onus is also on Ankara. Ankara is demanding that the Kurds in Iraq round up the PKK and so on and attack them. But the government in Ankara is also not willing to discuss the situation with the Kurdistan regional government. This is key. If you want us to deal with something that's going on in our territory, you have to talk to us. We are not there to take orders from a foreign government. We might take orders from Baghdad, but we do not take orders from a foreign government. So I think there is, of course, there is onus on us, and I would argue that both President Talabani and President Barzani, President of the region, have offered the hand of friendship to Ankara, have actively pursued dialogue with Ankara, but it's also, the onus is also on Ankara to take some steps forward in that direction as well.
David.
I think I better prefix what I say by saying I hold absolutely no brief for the PKK whatsoever, and I personally view it as a nightmare organization. Having said that, I have to say I'm so dismayed by the conduct of Ankara over the past 20 years with regard to the PKK. The absolutely adamant attitude of denial about Kurdish identity and about the Kurdish movement, and with regard to Turkey, has been so counterproductive. And if I would put my finger on one real achievement that the PKK has managed since it started its conflict with the Turkish state in about 1980, it is that they have actually created a mass movement inside Turkey amongst ordinary Kurds of a sense of Kurdish identity which, quite honestly, only existed in a rather limited way before. And it's not going to go away. Well, it might go away in 100 years' time. It's not going to go away overnight. It is there. And Turkey has a similar problem over its Kurds as it has over the whole Armenian genocide. It just finds it unbearable even to face talking about it. And I take great comfort from the fact that now some of you, I'm sure, have read Tana Akcham's book, A Shameful Act about the Armenian genocide, which has been published in Turkey. And this whole issue of talking to the Kurdish regional government, of actually recognizing that there are Kurds inside Turkey who need to be talked with. It doesn't mean you have to talk with the PKK. The PKK would be, in my view, dealt out of this game. I mean, it would go on fighting on the border, but it would be dealt out of the issue as a serious force if Ankara could only bring itself to talk to Kurds inside the country who just want a measure of recognition as to who they are. Then Ankara's relationship with the KRG and with Baghdad would become much, much easier.
Peter, are you still there?
I am.
Yeah. The current crisis with Turkey and indeed recent actions on the Iranian border have highlighted just how vulnerable Iraqi Kurdistan is. When the Americans took the Iranian official from the hotel in Sulaymaniyah, Iran closed the border. The Turks now are also threatening to close the main border crossing in the north between Iraqi Kurdistan and Turkey. This would be potentially devastating on the economy of the Kurdistan region. How on earth is Kurdistan going to survive as an independent country with such neighbors?
Well, yes, unfortunately, there's not the possibility of moving. But the reality is that once Kurdistan becomes independent, then there's a new dynamic, and the neighbors may adjust. Turkey is the most likely country to adjust. And in fact, virtually all Turks accept that there is a de facto independent Kurdistan, but there's nothing they can do about it. And some argue that this has actually been a good thing for Turkey. I don't want to overstate this, but the argument goes as follows. Who are the Kurds? They're secular, they're pro-Western, they aspire to be democratic, and they're not Arabs. They're a lot like us. They're a good buffer against an Iranian-dominated Arab Iraq. And some even say, and if Kurdistan becomes independent, it'll be dependent on Turkey. And so in that sense, we will reconstitute the last bit of territory that we lost, that Ataturk wasn't able to gain in the 1920s.
Okay, look, I'd like to throw it open to the floor now. If you've got questions, please give your name, an organization if you have one, and please keep your questions brief so we all get a chance to speak. Do we have a microphone? Yeah, okay. So, gentleman here.
Yes.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
Sardar Pushdari, Kurdistan Homeland Movement. In 1991, I have forwarded a program of Mosul Vilayat for independence of Kurdistan. And also I have forwarded the oil project for rebuilding of Kurdistan. I'm sorry, during the 1991, which the programs go to the UN and also pass it all to the British government, to American, to French, to all the top world community. But Mr. Barzani and Talabani, they are delayed and they are refused to start me on those two projects.
Mm-hmm. And your question is?
My question is why they call themselves a leadership, but they are refusing to follow of independence of Kurdistan.
Okay. Cameron, perhaps you'd like to answer.
Well, my advice is continue your work and continue trying to convince the Kurdish leadership. It's not that easy, you know. As the Kurdish leadership has, the Kurdish leadership has its own program, its own agenda, its own obligations towards Iraq, and they have also obligations to the Kurdish population of Iraq, who voted for an Iraqi constitution, who voted for federalism within Iraq, and who elected this leadership. So the leadership has obligations to its own populations, and that's what the Kurds opted at this stage for being part of a federal democratic Iraq.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I think that Jalal Talabani has been incredibly shrewd in opting and accepting the post of President of Iraq. We simply don't know what's going to happen in Arab Iraq. But in the fullness of time, there will be a government in Baghdad that has full command over the Arab territories. And I think the likelihood is that it will try to forge a relationship either with the KDP or the PUK, possibly both, but I think that's unlikely. And it is quite likely at that point either that there will be a government in Baghdad will emerge that actually fully represents the really powerful components of Iraq. And if the Kurdish region opts not to be part of that, I think then the Kurds are looking at another war.
Okay, any more questions? Gentleman here.
Michael?
Yeah? Peter, did you want to come back on that?
No,
Oh.
yeah, I just wanted to respond, to agree with your point, that the Kurdish leadership, by its role in Baghdad, is helping Kurdistan. But the Kurdish leadership in Erbil is in fact on the ground creating an independent state with its own army, with its own control of natural resources, that is in all regards completely separate from Iraq. So it's been a very clever two-track policy to have a powerful position in Baghdad and yet at the same time create a de facto independent state that at the right time can become independent, which is exactly what every Kurd hopes will eventually happen and believes will eventually happen.
So it's a kind of good cop, bad cop situation. Well.
Can I just...
Yes, come on.
If I may comment on this, I think what Peter is saying, it's very interesting. I always believe that the more Iraqi Kurds become Iraqis, it's the better for the Kurdish cause. They lose nothing. The Kurds fought very hard when the Iraqi constitution was drafted. The Kurdish leadership fought hard to have a constitution which recognizes the Kurdish reality, which gives the Kurds their rights, which recognizes the Kurdish entity, and this was very important to really have for future allies among the Iraqi Arabs for the Kurds. You know, I remember when the constitution was drafted, in fact, in Baghdad, in the house of Mr. Masoud Barzani, and once we were sitting with him, and we just said it's an irony that the Iraqi constitution is drafted in your house and under the large portrait of your father, Mullah Mustafa Barzani. And so I think the Iraqi Kurds are not losing by having this policy towards Iraq.
Okay, gentlemen.
My name is James Bailey-Smith, and I'm a freelance documentary filmmaker. I just wanted to ask if, say for instance, in 5 years down the line there was a de facto independent Kurdistan, do you think that they would enact a law, like a right of return, similar to how Israel has done with the Jews? And if so, how would this impact on the neighbours? How do you think Iran and Turkey would take having a lot of their citizens leave? And do you think they would leave? I mean, do you think this is something that could be a big movement of people if there was a de facto.
You mean the right of return from the Kurdish diaspora in Europe, or from those Kurds who are Arabized?
If you're Kurdish and you can prove it, then you can live in Kurdistan. Do you think? What do you think that would do to the region?
Bayan, would you like to?
Well, if you're Kurdish and you are a Kurd in Turkey or a Kurd in Iran or a Kurd in Syria, Kurd in Iraq, you see that as your homeland. I myself, in my own family, I was born in Iraq. My parents are Iraqi Kurds, but my grandmother was a Syrian Kurd. And I also have other relatives who are Turkish Kurds. My husband is from Iran, but he's also Kurdish. I can't imagine my whole tribe actually turning up for Sunday lunch at my door. I think people will stay where they are because they are attached to their ancestral home wherever it is. Perhaps the right to return applies more to within Iraq. As I'm sure you all know, Kirkuk is, and other areas of Iraq were Arabized, and the Kurdish population was expelled and other people were brought in their place. And there is a mechanism set out within the constitution to normalize that situation and to allow the people in those areas to vote in a referendum whether their region should join the Kurdistan region. That's the only right of return that I see happening.
Should I understand? Maybe right of return is the wrong thing. I just mean a sort of a homeland, because I don't think these other countries will allow their territories to join an independent Kurdistan. So maybe these minorities in these countries would prefer to be part of an independent Kurdistan and leave.
Cameron.
Well, I agree with Bayan, really. It's about if Iraqi Kurdistan becomes independent, then it will be independent for Iraqi Kurds. Now, even now, there are Kurds from other parts of Kurdistan who live in Iraqi Kurdistan, who work there. But I am not sure that Kurds of Turkey or of Iran would like to move to an independent Iraqi Kurdistan. In fact, just a couple of days ago, there was a poll survey in Turkey, and a majority of Kurds in Turkey said that they will not move to Iraqi Kurdistan if it becomes independent. They would like to stay in Turkey.
Okay. Sam.
Sami Shorish, a Kurdish journalist. If the pressure on PKK increases from all sides, from the Kurds of Iraq, from US, from Turkey, don't you think that maybe PKK will turn to Iran? And at that time, the dangers of PKK will be more increased.
Adil, would you like to?
Well, I mean, the other short-term policy and the long-term policy. Perhaps, yes, on the short-term policy, but we've been talking about the long-term. I mean, if you listen carefully to Kamran's answers and Bayan's answers, it's actually a long-term interest. So it's actually in the long-term interest of a movement towards independent Kurdistan is to actually have this nuisance of the PKK or to just try to deal with it and marginalize it. And I think I'm really interested more. David said that by marginalizing them, if Ankara was to learn the lesson, act in a more clever way, and I think it cannot act in a more clever way without pressure from the EU and pressure from the United States, then perhaps the violent elements within the Kurdish-Turkish movement will be marginalized and just go away in a few years' time.
It's a lady at the back.
Hello, Sue Davies, freelance radio journalist. I'm interested in the twin-track policy that was mentioned a while ago, and it's hard to quite reconcile how long such a policy might last. Considering the amount of pressure and, if you like, publicity and also passion that's been put into the Kurdish issue in recent decades, it's hard not to envisage that one of the reasons that at least one of these tracks might be continuing to be so well expressed is because of the access to oil that might be coming as a result of the Iraqi constitution and the regionalization policy, or the regional power that's been given. So my question to the assembled company, whoever, maybe Peter, who mentioned this clever twin tracking, would be how long can such a thing last, and whether maybe how oil is apportioned is going to be the breaking point, or what do you call it, the deal breaker.
Peter?
I didn't catch the entire question. Can you sort of restate it, Michael?
You were talking earlier about the sort of the twin track policy that the Kurds are pursuing, of having Jalal Talabani in Baghdad, and meanwhile sort of building up the kind of a nucleus of an independent region in the north. And the question was, how long will such a policy be able to survive, and whether the battle for Iraq's oil is going to be the deal breaker?
In fact, there's no inconsistency between building up an independent Kurdistan and the Kurds playing an active role in Baghdad. What exists in Kurdistan, with its own economy, its own tax power, its own army, is in fact fully recognized in the Iraqi constitution, which was largely shaped by the Kurds. On the question of oil, the Kurds are simply operating consistent with the Constitution, according to the Constitution. And there's no argument about the fact of sharing the oil revenues. The Kurdistan oil law allocates 83% of the oil that's found in Kurdistan to the central government. Everybody agrees that Kurdistan share is 17%. The argument that is going on between Baghdad and Kurdistan, both about oil and about revenue sharing, has to do with control. Baghdad has taken what, in my view, is extra constitutional measures to try to exercise control over exploration activities in Kurdistan, where it really has no role. And on the oil revenue sharing issue, the problem is that the Kurds do not want this to go through the budget of Iraq. They believe that basically it should go automatically to them. If it goes through the budget of Iraq, then in fact they believe they will lose control, and I'm sure that's exactly right. So I think it's unlikely that there'll be any agreement on a revenue-sharing law, not because there's any disagreement about the fact of revenue sharing, but because there's a disagreement about the mechanism. But revenue sharing will continue to take place, and none of that will diminish the de facto independence of Kurdistan.
Leanne.
I really just wanted to make a couple of comments about the idea of this twin track policy, that we're supporting Baghdad and the strengthening of Iraq, but that we're also somehow pursuing an agenda of independence. I don't know why we Kurds, we've suffered in Iraq, and we've suffered generally, but in Iraq we've suffered genocide. We had 4,000 villages destroyed. We had a mass exodus of our young people, particularly young men, running away from Kurdistan and from Saddam Hussein to go to Europe and America and so on. All that we're doing is we're undoing decades of dictatorship. We're trying to build our economy. We're not building towards any independence. We're trying to build our economy to make it normal. So I don't really agree that just because we're doing that, while unfortunately the rest of Iraq is struggling to stand up, that this necessarily means that we're heading for independence. We're just trying to head towards normalization. We're trying to recover from genocide and bankruptcy, or being in the grips of a bankrupt regime. I would also argue that maybe this is some of you might disagree, but let's look at the United Kingdom. We have Scotland. Scotland has its own, I think, some legal powers, its own laws, it has its own education system, and yet it's part of the United Kingdom. I know there are many Scots who would love to be independent, so I'm not arguing that case, but there are also many Scots who are happy to be part of the United Kingdom because they see the economic benefits and other benefits of being a very part of a strong and united country. I don't see why that couldn't apply to Kurdistan and Iraq as well, if we, ever manage to reach that sort of a stability.
Yeah, just one very short comment, because I think Bayan said quite a lot of what I was going to say about example of the United Kingdom. But the question or the phrase, the twin track, somehow might give the impression that the Kurds are deliberately pursuing some devious policy. Actually, it isn't. If you look at their history, it's almost the one liberation movement that actually they never used dishonest acts of violence. They never hijacked an aircraft. They never put actually a car bomb anywhere. At a time when even the world and the Middle East in general was actually supporting some violent actions, and they were extremely careful. Even when Saddam tried to assassinate the late Mullah Mustafa Barzani, he himself said no, never actually take revenge, never go down this road. So the actual history of the Kurds is quite an honorable political cause that we have to just be careful not sort of to stick a label that they're taking some kind of a devious policy.
Thank you. I'm Mark Grigoryan, BBC Russian Service. The question is, I was in eastern Turkey less than a year ago, and I met a lot of Kurds, and I would never swear that they all were PKK warriors or fighters. And many of them referred to the Iraqi Kurdistan as southern Kurdistan. And it's true, they would say that we won't move to Kurdistan, but they would say that we live in Kurdistan and we would like to unite with Kurdistan, create a bigger Kurdistan and unite a part of Turkey with it. Are there any signals you're sending to them? Are there any signs you're telling them to do or not to do?
Bayan, you get all the tough ones.
Yes. There are no signals. The Kurdistan regional government represents only the Kurdistan region in Iraq. Our President Barzani, is only the president of Kurdistan region in Iraq. There are no political signals, if you like, but we have to also accept the reality that I gave the example earlier of my own family. We Kurds were not asked, do we wish to be divided among these four countries, and other countries too, by the way, but let's stick to the four main countries. Nobody invited us to be part of the decision-making process. So in some ways, yes, I can see why the borders are seen as artificial, because you have one family that's suddenly scattered between four countries. But in terms of our political activities, in terms of building our economy and so on, I speak only for Kurdistan region in Iraq, and that's how we see ourselves.
David?
I mean, living in a state where Kurdish identity has been denied for so very long, obviously what goes on in the KRG region of Iraq is enormously seductive. And I'd just like to add, I mean, Bayan spoke very eloquently about the appalling destruction committed by Saddam against both people and villages in Iraqi Kurdistan. And people may have forgotten that during the 1990s, Turkey destroyed over 3,000 villages and hamlets, and that it actually rendered homeless between, a modest estimate is 2.5 million. I mean, even a Turkish human rights minister in 1994, when it was still going strong, admitted that 2 million Kurds had been forcibly evicted. And these evictions were very often extraordinarily brutal. So if you're asking why the PKK actually gets recruits today, bear in mind that 50% of Kurds in the southeast of Turkey are under the age of 15. So today they are the little kids who saw their parents being tortured or humiliated in some brutal way, having to walk away from their livestock, their house, their everything, and then drift to a slum area. It's no great surprise that the PKK has a problem recruiting. So there's a whole agenda which makes what's going on in northern Iraq or southern Kurdistan compellingly attractive to somebody who's living under the if you like, the jackboot of the Turkish army in the southeast of Turkey.
The Turkish government has introduced a number of reforms.
Indeed.
Cultural reforms. I mean, do you think they're enough to satisfy?
No, they're not enough. I mean, it's great. I'm not a pessimist, because I think that what's happening and been happening in Turkey over the last 6 or 7 years is enormously encouraging. But there's a lot further that Ankara has to go. And there are some ways that if Turkey became a completely open democracy, and if it really started to pump money into the southeast, and it's very easy just to blame the Republic of Turkey for the ills of the east and the southeast of Turkey, but it was the most impoverished part of the Ottoman Empire, so it's a long-standing problem. But nevertheless, it requires a long-standing and major effort. Now, if Ankara went in for all that, I think that the feeling that Kurds had inside Turkey about themselves would be transformed. I mean, they would still want to say, I am Kurdish, and they would want to display their Kurdish identity, but I think they would then start to really feel that they were participants in the Republic of Turkey, as opposed to marginalized people who are used in conscription as cheap cannon fodder against the PKK, and who just get kicked around whenever they try to assert their identity. And I just think that there's there's a long way to go, and I am encouraged that it's better than it was 7 years ago, much better.
Gentleman just behind you.
Robert Gardner, just an interested person in history. You may have just answered my question, but 2 questions, very short. What do the PKK want, and why won't Ankara talk to Kurds?
Who would like to take that? Well, perhaps I could. I recently had a meeting with the PKK leadership in the mountains of northern Iraq, and I asked them, what will it take for you to lay down your weapons tomorrow? The first answer was, we want to see better treatment for our leader, Abdullah Öcalan, who is currently in prison in solitary confinement in Imrali, the prison island of Istanbul. They believe he's being poisoned. They want to see better medical treatment for him. They want to see give him a new prison. Secondly, they said they wanted the Turkish military to withdraw to their barracks. And thirdly, they wanted to see the Kurds recognized as a part of Turkey. They say that they would like to see the new Turkish constitution have some reference to the Kurds as a minority. They would like to see full Kurdish sort of political rights, cultural rights, language rights in Turkey. They said if those things are granted, we'll lay down our arms tomorrow.
Is any of that realistic?
I don't see it in the near future.
So the second question is, why won't Ankara talk to the Kurds?
Well, I think as David has said, that there is a huge resistance. There's also a big political battle going on within Turkey itself about who can be more nationalist than the other. Peter, I don't know, are you still with us? Will you have anything to add to that? He's not still with us. No.
I got it.
Cameron.
Well, I think it's interesting that there is now a very lively debate in Turkey about how what to do with the PKK and with the Kurdish question in Turkey. And just a few days ago, the Milliyet newspaper conducted a series of interviews with previous chiefs of staffs in Turkey. Starting with General Kanan Evren, who was the president of Turkey in the early 80s. And they all admitted, starting from Evren, that they made mistakes. Kanan Evren said that he banned Kurdish language, and it was a big mistake. And it would have been better if he hadn't done that. Other chief of staffs, previous chief of staff, said the same thing. Some of them even said that we tried very hard, we fought against the PKK, but now, but we didn't achieve anything. And if we will fight them again now and send our troops into the mountains, we will still don't achieve anything. So it's very interesting. And also in the Turkish press, you can read every day. I mean, there is a very lively debate, and people talk openly now. Commentators, almost everything we are talking here, you can read it in the Turkish press. So this is, as David said, this is an encouraging sign. As for my opinion, why they don't speak to the Kurds, the Turks, because they have this problem. They are in a dilemma. There are a lot of different pressures. You have the military, you have the nationalists, you have, and the ruling party, AK Party, is in a dilemma. The problem is that if they speak to, I read a Turkish commentator who said it openly. He said, if we talk to the Kurdish administration in northern Iraq, then we will have to say the administration of Iraqi Kurdistan. They cannot bring themselves to recognize a Kurdish administration in Kurdistan. Of course, they all now attack directly Mr. Masoud Barzani, but I think if it was the other way around, if Mr. Barzani was Iraqi president and Jalal Talabani was the president of Kurdistan, then he would be under fire. So it is not really a question of a person, but it is a question of a position. It is very apparently very difficult for the Turkish government to bring itself to speak directly to the Kurdish leadership in Iraqi Kurdistan. They say we can't speak with Mr. Talabani because he is legitimate president of Iraq. We can't speak to Hushyar Zibari, who is also a Kurd and foreign minister, but we cannot speak to the Kurdish administration.
Bayan,
just while we're on the subject of Turkey, I'm a bit worried that perhaps we're painting a very gloomy picture here. I think generally we're all very optimistic, or encouraged at least, perhaps that's a better way of saying it. But just to put it in context, there is a great deal of trade that goes on between Turkey and the Kurdistan region in Iraq. So, I mean, billions of dollars worth of trade that goes on every year. A lot of the contractors that are, fueling the construction boom that's going on now in Kurdistan region in Iraq, they're Turkish. So I would hate for you to come away with a picture that actually there is no relationship between Kurdistan region and Ankara. That's not the case. There are some very, very good and strong ties.
Okay, look, we're running short on time here, so let's take a few questions at once, and then we'll just offer them around the panel. Gentleman there, please.
Well, having discussed the issue of Kurds in Middle East, is obvious now that it's a bit complicated and it's kind of being treated by all neighbors, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, kind of being an enemy, or they try just to repress her and just to deny the whole identity. So my question is for the whole panel. Don't you think it's time now for Europe countries and America and the whole international community to recognize this issue and just deal with it as the Palestinian issue? I think it's much complicated.
Okay, thanks.
That's my question. My name is Hiwal Mahmoud. I'm a Kurdish activist. Thank you very much.
Gentleman at the back.
I've dealt with aspects of the PKK in London. Some years ago, I was invited by one of the representatives to go to the Barbican. And this was under the Thatcher government. They wanted an introduction to Linda Chalker. I went to the Barbican there, the PKK, and I found people there with weapons and a lot of violence, and they wanted an introduction the Conservative government. It was just rubbish.
Okay.
PKK then, now and then, in my opinion, runs things from, you know, the bottom end of the gun. Now I want to ask Mr. Darwish, yes, can you explain to me, because you're one of the most foremost Middle Eastern commentators that everyone has ever seen, yes, how you can possibly, yes, in this country at least, can get the political concept of the PKK as a peace-loving thing when they run the dugs in North London where you live, yes. I've seen guns in their offices in the Barbican,
okay.
And people tell us these are reasonable people.
Fine.
No,
thanks very much. We've got several people wanting to ask questions.
Right.
Yeah, you've asked your questions. So. Gentleman here, please.
Hi, I'm Ömer Çavuşoğlu, a student at London School of Economics. I was at Zurich last weekend and I've encountered a Kurdish march over the streets, and people were chanting Kurdish songs and saying terrorist Turkey, which I kind of tried to understand. And as soon as they realized that we were two Turkish students walking, they tried to chase behind us, and having lived actually in a country with a strong central government and suffering from actually nationalist causes, and as you have also mentioned, still today people are just, you know, arguing about who's more nationalistic. I see that this doesn't really take anyone anywhere, and also seeing that the Kurds having some sort of say in, especially in liberal countries across Europe, now that they're being recognized by the EU and the United States as an entity. What do you think the people in Kurdistan actually think about Turks? Because I've also read in a recent article that people in northern Iraq are actually still having positive attitudes against Turks because of, in the 1990s, there was influx of Kurds into Turkey in the Saddam regime.
Okay.
So what do you think?
Fine, thanks. Gentleman behind.
My name is Martin Vogel, I'm a freelance radio journalist. It seems that there's very few countries that are looking forward to an independent Kurdistan. So I'd like to ask Bayan, and then perhaps a comment from someone else on the panel, how much focus is going into the armed forces of Kurdistan, and what hindrance is there by any other parties to building up the armed forces?
Of Kurdistan?
Of Kurdistan.
Okay. And just one more over there.
Sorry, my name is Hajar Sadura. I'm a student. I just wanted to ask what the panel thinks were are the real motives of the Turkish government by actually bringing all of these troops on the border. Is it really for PKK or is it for some other reasons? That's one. Secondly, I would like to know just one question. What grounds and who has got the primary responsibility for creating the ground for bringing all parties together in order to reach a peaceful solution to the Kurdish problem in Turkey and then further out in the region?
Okay. Peter, are you still with us? No, he's gone. So I think the first question was, I could summarize as, you know, isn't it time for the international community to recognize the Kurdish reality?
Well, yes. I mean, I'll just take a dip in all the questions, really. On the international community, I mean, actually, I repeat what I've been saying again. Yes, they will have to, and perhaps if Turkey is a key country, then there's quite a great deal of trade-off. But again, they have also to see some kind of price to pay if really they take only one course. This is the complexity, of course. I mean, what Paul was saying about the PKK, I share the sentiment. But again, David actually put his fingers on issues where when you alienate the community so much, as it happened with the whole South Anatolia water project and driving the Kurds out, and the more you actually have enclosure of the moderate elements, the more you actually marginalize those with violent tendencies. What Turkey wants, I think it would be extremely unwise if they perhaps wanted to actually internationalize the problem they have with their own a Kurdish community. They have to see it within a sort of multi-ethnic Turkey rather than internationalize it, because they have quite a lot, as Bayan said, of trade. If they are, I know there are some elements within Turkey try to get the Turkmens again to suddenly they remember the Turkmens are there. They never remember them, except the first time they thought about, I think in the late 1990s. So again, it would be very wise of Turkey to keep the problem within Turkey rather than internationalize it.
Camera.
Well, I would like to comment on the gentleman there who spoke about the relations between Kurds and the Turks. You know what, the problem is it's not about PKK and the Kurds. People sometimes mix these two issues. It's different. When for the Kurds in Iraq, they of course sympathize with the Kurds in Turkey, but that doesn't mean that necessarily they support the PKK. The PKK, I agree with David. It's really a nightmare for the Kurds. It's a problem for the Kurds not only in Turkey but in Iraq as well, and it's becoming very difficult to know what really the PKK wants. They have different, leaderships. They have Öcalan in prison who gives a certain kind of instructions. They have their leadership in Europe. They have the leadership in the mountains. So in Turkey, sometimes when Turks confuse these two issues, PKK and Kurds, this is where the Iraqi Kurds feel that they are. They are more with their Kurdish brethren in Turkey. So I think if Turkey should have a policy towards the Kurds in Turkey and separate it from the issue of PKK. This is very important.
Okay. Bayan, the question there was about what is being done to build up the armed forces in Kurdistan and how that will relate to Iraq as a whole.
Well, first of all, the Kurdistan armed forces, we call them the Peshmerga, they are recognized in the Iraqi constitution. Kurdistan region is enabled or allowed to have its own security forces. So we have our forces. They keep the region peaceful and stable, on the whole very successfully, despite the very strong terrorist threat that we all face internationally and within Iraq. I don't really know what else to say about that, other than we have also contributed some Peshmerga forces to Baghdad to try to help the situation there.
But the Kurdistan region would never again allow an Arab army into its area.
Again, in the constitution, for the Iraqi army to enter Kurdistan region, they have to have the permission or the approval of the Kurdistan National Assembly. This really is because of the genocide that we suffered before, and you could argue that are there any other people who would willingly accept the army that oppressed them so much to come back? But there was one other question that I would actually like to touch on, which I understood the question to be, what is the attitude of the Kurds to the people of Turkey? If that's the question, then my answer is we have no problem with the Turkish people. As I said earlier, there is a great deal of trade with Turkey. In the 1990s, I believe you touched on this, in the 1990s, Turkey played a good role in helping us in our humanitarian situation, and also was a route out of Iraq when Saddam Hussein had, a stranglehold on our region. Turkey was actually a way out for us. So our relationship with Turkey is much more complex and subtle than you might be led to believe just from reading the odd headline.
Okay, we'll just finish with David. David, if you could address one of the questions, which was, if a political solution is needed, if dialogue is needed to solve one of the many issues around the Kurds in the region, who is going to take charge of that process?
Help. I mean, in a sense, what's really needed is for the governments of the region to actually really face the problem, confront it with with some honesty and with a longer-term view. And the problem inside Turkey, I mean, there's a sense in which Turkey, of course, is being cajoled and encouraged by the European Union, and that's I think, a wonderful process. But Turkey actually has to confront its own inheritance, and it's been so locked into the Ataturk inheritance. Secular state, everybody is a Turk, so there is a denial of Islam, and there is a denial of ethnic variety in Turkey. And in an undeclared way, one can see that just the fact that the AKP is now the governing party in Turkey and has managed so far to satisfy the generals. Actually, there's a process going on, a change of attitude. Islam has actually crept back in a way which I think is going to be acceptable to the people of Turkey. And there is a sense in which the Kurds, as Kurds, have to come back into the body of it. And it's a little bit like the Republic of China not being able to admit that it ceased to be communist. You know, I mean, it's a joke, supposing, you know, suggesting that China is a communist state. But they've never formally repudiated Mao Zedong. And there's a sense in which one feels that Turkey will find it very difficult to repudiate the Ataturk legacy. But things change, things have moved on, and somehow Turkey has to find the courage to move, to shake off a legacy that may have seemed appropriate in the 1920s and 30s, and to move into the 21st century.
Okay, just to finish, the title of tonight's talk was, "Is it time for an independent Kurdistan?" I'll ask the panel to give a one-word answer, please. Adil.
Yes.
No.
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 Okay, 3-1. And as
Peter, no.
Oh, Peter, are you there?
4-1.
Okay, we'll include Peter in the cry. And I, of course, must remain neutral. So thank you very much for coming. And I hope you've enjoyed it and found it entertaining, informative, and